Hi everyone, welcome. This event is brought to you by Data Talks Club, which is a community of people who love data. We have weekly events. Today is one of these events. We have live podcast on Friday, and we have webinars on Tuesday. So if you want to learn more about our events, go to our website, datatalks.club/events, and you will find all the events we have. So for example, for the next week, on Tuesday, we'll talk about A/B tests. To stay up to date with our events, you can do many things. You can subscribe to our newsletter, you can join our Slack, and you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. And that's probably it. The last thing is today you can ask any question you want, and please use Slido for that. I don't always see questions in the live channel, in the live chat in YouTube. And to find the link for Slido, you go to the live chat, and it's the pinned link at the top. So just click on this and ask any question you want. And that's all for the introduction. Are you ready to start?
Let's go.
Okay, so let me just open my notes. So this week we'll talk about the interview process, getting hired as a data scientist, and not only data scientist. And we have a special guest today, Oleg. Oleg worked as a data science manager at Uber, where he built data science teams. He also has experience building several startups in Europe, and recently he created NextRound, which is a company, a free service for practicing interviews and receiving personalized feedback and learning materials. Welcome.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
So before we go into our main topic of recruitment and interviews, let's start with your background. Can you tell us a bit about your career journey so far?
So I started as a software engineer. I was building websites for a few years. And then at some point I heard about the Netflix prize. It was one of the first open data science competitions a few years before Kaggle, I believe. And I got so engaged in this topic of personalization that I ended up writing a PhD thesis about recommender agents. And then I transitioned from an engineer to an analyst in a startup. Eventually, I became a manager. I led a team of data scientists and engineers working on recommender engine, product analytics, and building the data infrastructure in that company. And after that, I wanted to apply for another data science job in a startup called List. And I thought, I'm probably not the most experienced data scientist applying for the job. I also needed a visa. And I just began brainstorming. How do I make myself stand out so they don't reject me right away, and I don't even get to talk to anyone from the company. And I tried to reverse engineer the process and think about it. When someone applies for a job in my team, what do I do? What do I look at in CVs? What are the signals that I'm trying to get? And usually when you look at someone's CV and it says, I don't know, experience in Python, it doesn't really tell you much because it's very subjective. Maybe the person read a blog post about this or invented the language, you never know. So I thought, okay, I need to stand out from the other candidates, and I also need to somehow demonstrate that these buzzwords in my CV, machine learning, big data, Python, is actually something that I'm familiar with. And this was an e-commerce website, and they were hiring for a data scientist to improve their recommender engine. And I thought, okay, I need to make something differently. So instead of sending a CV, I wrote a blog post about how I would improve the recommender engine if I worked there. But since I did not work there, I didn't have any data. So I had to be creative, and I basically took a list of brands that they were selling on this website and wrote a very simple Python script that gets a list of their followers from Twitter. And then I implemented a very simple recommender algorithm in Python that basically lets you type your Twitter nickname, and then you will get recommendations based on who you follow and the model that has been trained on these designers that are being sold by this website. So I wrote this blog post, sent it to them, and what I had in mind was, okay, I want to show that I understand the very basics of machine learning. I can program a little bit, essentially to demonstrate this, the very first chapter of any machine learning book. I sent it to them. Surprisingly, it worked out, and I got the job.
Was it a public post? Did you just publish it on, I don't know, Towards Data Science, or you sent a document to them?
So I put it on Medium, but I put it down afterwards because I didn't know how much of it can be public.
Okay.
Even though I used only the data accessible everywhere, but I tried to do a little bit of reverse engineering, like what kind of data is being sent from the website, what kind of APIs they're using, and so on. So I put it down at some point. There's actually an article about this from the other side by a recruiter that hired me and explained this hiring experience from their perspective. That was very interesting to read. But this is how I got that job. There, I focused on deployment of machine learning models, personalization, ranking, and a little bit of data engineering, again, scaling the data infrastructure. After it, I joined Uber in Amsterdam as a product data scientist. In a couple of years, I became a manager again and led a team of data scientists that worked on forecasting models. And the goal was to predict the lifetime value of a user and quantify the impact of different events on user behavior. And I left Uber last year. And every time I applied for a job in data science, there was one thing that I really hated. When you get rejected and when you read this rejection email and it tells you nothing. So you spend hours interviewing, you spend hours working on some take-home assignment, and then you get some generic standard rejection email. Maybe you even get some feedback, but usually it's completely useless and not actionable. You can't do anything out of it. So I began to think, okay, what can be better? How can I make this better? And I ended up building this free service where you can practice data science interviews with a chatbot. And then you will receive detailed personalized feedback based on your answers with some links to relevant materials to the topics where you can improve. So this is what I've been working on in the past few months. You can check this out. I have mock interviews for data scientists and product analysts. So far, it has been on this website. There have been 500, a little over 500 mock interviews so far, and this is a super interesting experience just to analyze and calibrate the questions, because there is never a correct answer. Like there is never a finite number of correct answers. If you ask some case study questions about how would you like build this kind of model, so I keep getting surprised in a positive way every day, because you never know what to expect, right?
Yes, indeed. So these rejections that you got, do you have any idea why they're generic? I think I have some ideas. Also working as a hiring manager, like also being a hiring manager sometimes. But do you have some ideas why these rejection letters are generic? Why can companies give feedback?
Well, there can be many reasons, right? So, well, first of all, I don't know, can we call it laziness? But let's say to hire one person, you need to interview 20. And this is realistic. This can be higher, this can be lower. To provide detailed, actionable feedback to everyone, it will take some time. And then this is really up to you whether you think it is worth it or not. I think it is worth it, because who knows, maybe these people will join your company again. Like it's always, it's a closed loop. There are not so many data scientists in the world or in a given city. Another reason, apart from spending time on it, another reason can be just being polite. And because you never know when you try to provide some constructive, actionable feedback to a person, you don't know how they will react to this. So you try to be polite, and it brings you to to some very standard and generic feedback that doesn't really pinpoint you into any certain weaknesses. I think there might be some legal reasons about this as well. What was your experience? What are your ideas?
Yeah, so basically what you said, except I didn't think about being polite, because I think actually candidates are looking forward to receiving feedback. So I didn't think about this angle. Maybe I should have, but yeah, I think this is the first one is time, and then the second is legal reasons. So you don't always cannot always give feedback because of some legal stuff. Okay, and then you decide, okay, like I hate not receiving feedback. Let's create a company, a website where people can just practice and then receive feedback at the end, right?
Yeah, so basically what I wanted to do, I began thinking with my experience as a candidate, as a hiring manager, what value can I offer, right? And then essentially what I did, I wrote down a list of situations that kept happening from company to company, from team to team. For example, and this was completely different stories. Like, for example, as a data scientist or especially as an analyst, you're always balancing between working on some important model and stakeholders asking you to work on some urgent fixes or urgent ad hoc analysis, or you're running an A/B test and then you see that some of the metrics improved and some of the metrics actually got worse. What do you do? So I started just writing down a list of situations that happened in my life that required some thinking, and that were generic enough to apply to any company. And then from these situations, from these case studies, I created an interview plot that basically introduces you into some context. You are working in this kind of company, and then your goal is to do this and that. A stakeholder comes to you and asks you to work on this. What do you do? Depending on your answer, it will ask you different follow-up questions, maybe switch a topic, or maybe go in depth to get more technical. And I reached out to about 30 data science hiring managers to get their feedback on these interview questions that I prepared, so that it's not completely biased by my personal experience in these companies that I worked at. I got a lot of very interesting feedback from them. And then I just published this website, and so far so good. Everyone likes it.
You said you had 500 mock interviews, but the title for this event today is what I learned after interviewing 300 data scientists. So should we update it to 500?
Time flies. Well, these are mock interviews. Right? Like these are not interviews that I had at Uber. These are practice interviews.
Okay.
But then it's the same thing.
Okay, so speaking of interviews, so I imagine you did quite a few interviews, at least 300. So how does a typical interview process look like? What are the steps in this process?
So there is no standard here, right? It really depends on the company, on the size of the company. But usually, after you send your CV, a recruiter checks if your CV, if your experience matches the job description. Then they might have a call with you and ask a few things about your experience that were not clear from your CV, just again to make sure that your experience is relevant to a certain role in the company. The recruiter might also ask you a few questions about the salary expectations and your availability for the new job. After that, if your experience seems relevant to this job, some companies will send you a take-home assignment, expecting you to spend a few hours on that. And after that, there will be several rounds of interviews. One of them will be with the hiring manager. Most of the time, you get to speak with the actual manager. And after the interviews, there will be a debrief when the hiring manager and everyone who interviewed you will discuss your experience and make the final decision. and you will either get a job offer or receive this generic rejection email usually.
And in this, so you mentioned, okay, so the screening by the recruiter, home assignment, and then a bunch of technical interviews with the hiring manager. So what kind of technical interviews are there? So I imagine for data scientists, so they should be developers. I mean, they should be able to code. So I guess one of these checks coding, right? So what else do you?
Well, yeah, it really depends on the role.
Okay.
Right. And I even try to visualize different types of job profiles.
Okay.
And what I did an exercise when I just took some random 50 data science jobs, and I found a lot of data science jobs that had literally nothing in common. Right? It's so generic, and data science is just an umbrella term that includes machine learning engineers and product data scientists. On one side, there is an expectation that you will code a lot, that you will be building and deploying machine learning models that work in production. On the other side, the expectation is that you'll be running A/B tests and writing a lot of SQL and being more of a PM that is very confident when it comes to working with data.
Mm-hmm.
So the technical interviews really depend on the role. On the high level, whichever company you interview, probably at some point they will ask you about your previous experience. It might be a question like, tell us about some machine learning model that you built in the past and that you're proud of. And at some point, most likely you will be asked about some hypothetical case study. And very often this is just some very vague and generic question like, how would you predict user churn?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you mentioned product data scientist. This is somebody who is more like analytical, and machine learning engineer is an engineer, right? And then there is a whole spectrum of things, and you need to look at the actual job description to figure out what exactly to expect during the process, right?
I think that's the main advice in general. Like we can stop this podcast right here. the main advice is study the job description. Study not even the job description. Learn as much as you can about the role, and try to match your experience with the role, right? And to explain this, say you have 2 years of experience. For 1 year you worked as an accountant. For the second year you worked as a machine learning engineer. You're applying for a machine learning engineer role. Will you dedicate as much time to your accounting experience as to the machine learning engineer role? No, right? So if you have to put, I don't know, a year of your work experience or 10 years of your work experience on a piece of paper, you need to make sure it is as relevant as possible to the role you're applying for. And at the end, this is all about the signal and the noise. You want to emphasize the things that are the most relevant to the job, and just remove all the noise about your jobs that you had after college 10 years ago that are not relevant.
So I guess this brings us to the question about CVs. So, and this is the very first step in the job process, right? So a recruiter or hiring manager, somebody looks at your CV, which is a piece of paper, 1 or 2 or 3 pages, right? And they figure out if this candidate should go through the process or they reject them right away, right? So how do we make sure that we can pass this CV screening phase? So you mentioned that you need to make CV as relevant as possible to the job. And I guess for that, you need to really read the job description and see how your experience matches. What else can you do there? Like, how can you make your CV stand out?
So I would think of CV as your landing page, right? And think about some website. You see an ad on the internet, you click on the link, you end up on some website that you have never seen before. In 2 seconds, you will decide to close it or not, or this is something relevant, and you will keep looking at it. And the way websites are designed and implemented has changed a lot in the past 20 years, right? If you compare like internet 20 years ago, just text, to what it is now, there is a lot of change because there have been a lot of experimentation, there have been a lot of improvements. So think about CVs in the same way. The recruiter that is looking at your CV, so what is their goal of the recruiter that will look your CV when you apply for a job? The goal is to quickly estimate how valuable you will be in the company if you join. And even more specific, their goal is to estimate what will happen if they set up an interview between you and the hiring manager, how likely the hiring manager is to offer you a job or reject you, right? Because if every candidate, the goal of a resume or a CV for you is to get to an interview. It's not even to get a job, it's just to make sure that the interviews will happen and you will get to talk to someone technical. So when the recruiter looks at your CV, they might even not be familiar with the technical side of it. So what they have is the job description. They spoke with the hiring manager about the skills required for the role. They have it on one hand, and they have your CV on the other side. And then you can think of it as a very simple classification model that just looks for keywords, that just does the string search. The job description says to know, I don't know, TensorFlow. Do you have this word TensorFlow in your CV? The job description says, I don't know, be proactive. Are you proactive? So really try to do this matching in your mind, understand what the role requires. Unfortunately, job descriptions are also very generic most of the time, but try to do this, try to apply the job description to your past experience and personalize a CV for every role you're applying, because this is your goal to pass this screen, and then you will be able to chat about your past experience and demonstrate your technical skills. Recruiters are always on your side. When they look at your CV, when they have a call with you, recruiters are on your side because their goal is to fill the role, to place someone in the role. So it's in their interest for you to get this job. So you can, if you're having a call with the recruiter, ask them about the expectations, ask them about the process. They would be very happy to help you. But on the other side, again, if you think about this very first step, recruiters CV screening by a recruiter, if you think about it as a classifier, there is a very high penalty for false positives if the company hires the person that is not relevant for a job. Maybe they're trying something else, but not for this certain role. This is a big problem for both, right? Getting a job is a big commitment. So there is a very big penalty for this kind of error. But at the same time, there is zero penalty for not hiring a good person, a good candidate, because no one will even know if they were good or not. So this classifier tends to create a lot of false negative errors, and essentially a lot of candidates that would have gotten a job if they passed the first stage get rejected at the very first stage. So in your CV, try to first understand what is important for this role and what have I done in the past that is important for this role, and make sure you highlight it as much as possible, and remove everything else, remove all the noise. Then whenever you're describing your past experience in your current job or in your previous job, try to be very specific about what was your personal contribution to a project. Because, for example, if you write in the CV, I work on predictive models, I don't know, improving accuracy of predictive models, like it literally says nothing. Like, okay, you're a data scientist, you're expected to do that. What exactly did you do? Or even if you write, something like, we improved the accuracy of a random forest model by X%. Like, what exactly did you do? Did you identify the problem? Did you decide to use random forest? So try to be very specific in what exactly, in what was your contribution to whatever project was. And this is the main advice, I think. Also, if you're applying to a company, to maximize your chances of passing through this first step of the CV screening, you can try to reach out to a recruiter directly. You can try to reach out to someone from the team directly and ask them about the company, ask them about the team of the company. If you know someone, ask for a referral. It always helps to pass this first step. At least someone will definitely look at your CV, and probably you will secure this first call with someone from the company.
I think it gives an extra signal that, okay, somebody from within the company, somebody who already passed our hiring process, referred this person. So this person must be good. So let's take a closer look at the CV and.
Exactly. And also, this probably sounds very obvious, but it happens. Check for typos and errors. This is really bad signal because it just looks very unprofessional. Make sure the formatting is consistent throughout the document. Don't try to lie about things and pretend that you've built something that single-handedly built something that you haven't, because this can backfire. You never know. Maybe this company is interviewing your colleague in this and you don't know, and you're both trying to pretend that you did something that none of you did. So this can really backfire. And sometimes I see people that put the self-evaluations like Python 5 stars expert. So it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah. So basically, just to summarize, so CV is your landing page, and people spend like on a landing page, they don't spend more than 2 seconds. So this is the time span you will get when a recruiter looks at your CV. So you need to maximize the chances that you will pass this stage, and you do this by highlighting what is important for the role. You remove everything else, and you need to be specific about your personal contribution, and then it will maximize the chances that within these 2 seconds, the recruiter will take a look at your CV and then decide, okay, I want to look more at this CV, and eventually you will pass the screening, right? And after you pass the screening, so what happens next?
So after you pass the screening, most likely there will be interviews. There might be a take-home assignment that will probably take a few hours for you to implement. There are controversial opinions about take-home assignments because it takes a lot of time. If you're applying to 5 different jobs, then you need to work on 5 different take-home assignments, and it will take the entire week. I'm not a big fan of take-home assignments for that reason, because it's more of a signal of like whether a person has free time to work on the take-home assignment or not, rather than their actual skills. But at the same time, if you're given a take-home assignment, think about it in this way. What's the return of investment in spending your time on this take-home assignment? If you get this new job, well, you applied for this new job for a reason, right? Probably you think it's a better team, it's a better career opportunity. Most likely there will be some pay increase. Usually it's at least some 15%. So if you spend this one day working on take-home assignment, it will pay off if you get the job. So think about it from this risky work perspective, because it really pays off to invest into preparing for interviews and spending your time emphasizing your strengths and demonstrating your skills when you're interviewing. Because if you're not willing to, if you think it's not worth time to work on this, then maybe this is not a job that you really want. Anyway, after the take-home assignment, there will be interviews. Most likely there will be some from 3 to 6 rounds of interviews with different potential colleagues, and one of them will be with the hiring manager. On the technical rounds, I think you can split these two situations. Like at some point, you will be asked about your past experience. At some point, it will be some hypothetical questions, most likely about the company. If you are asked about your past experience, make sure you have, not if, it will happen. Make sure you have a couple of stories when, a couple of stories from your past experience that help you demonstrate your skills. I think it's really important to practice to know exactly what you're going to say, because when you're answering about these questions about your past experience, it's not only about, I don't know, I used random forest to predict house prices. When you tell this story, you can also highlight a lot more than your machine learning skills. And again, when you're telling about your past experience, try to emphasize your strengths between the lines. If you were the one who identified the problem and suggested to use a machine learning model to solve this problem, say it. If you suggested several modeling approaches and asked stakeholders for their feedback and then identified the requirements, say that you did it. If you found some interesting findings when you worked on this model and you decided to share it with your colleagues and made everyone more efficient, mention it. It's not just about the modeling, even if it may be presented as some technical interview, even if you're asked about some model that you built in the past. By answering this question, you can highlight a lot more than just your modeling skills. And those are the skills that really make the difference between, say, middle data scientist and senior data scientist, because this really shows your how autonomous you are, how proactive you are, that you can make everyone else around you more efficient and coach others. This is really helpful. And if you are asked about some hypothetical case, usually, well, it's hard to say because, again, there are so many companies and so everyone is doing it differently. What is very common is you will get asked a question about some very vague problem statement. It can be, again, like predict the user churn, predict, classify which users are fraudsters on our platform, predict how many orders or subscriptions we will have next month. And it's always intentionally some very vaguely defined problem statement. And when you're answering this kind of questions, I think the very first thing is to demonstrate that you're trying to understand the business goals. Like ask back, what do we do it for? Who will be using this model? What are the use cases? How do we define the churn? If you're predicting which users will churn, what is churn? Like, is it people that will not place an order within 2 weeks? Make it more concrete so that you understand the problem before you rush into the details. And then try to make sure that your narrative is very structured so that you start by understanding the goals. Then, okay, like what kind of data do we need? What kind of model do we choose? We build the model, how do we evaluate this? Try to not jump from some very abstract things about like what do we do into explaining how a certain modeling approach works and then back to showing the results and talking about the next steps with the model. Try to be it's okay to take some time and think about this. But this also lets you highlight your communication skills. And at each step, you want to think about, okay, what is the goal? We're building the model. We want to predict churn because of this and that. We need to get the data. What kind of data do we need? Here you can demonstrate your business and product and common sense by just thinking out loud which features will have impact on the output. Then you can start thinking about the modeling approach. And the goal is, okay, do we need explainability? Yes. Do we need to run it real time? yes, no, what kind of data do we have? That's why I choose gradient boosting trees. So that it's not, so that you always explain your choices. And then what can happen is that the interviewer will sometimes interrupt you and give you some new piece of information because they want you to go deeper on some certain topics, and see if you can identify some edge cases, some limitations of the algorithm that you choose, some limitations of the evaluation metric that you chose. But at every step, it's a good practice to start with understanding the goals, explaining the goals, what I'm trying to achieve here, and then go detailed enough so that it doesn't sound like common sense, but you sound like an engineer, right? So, for example, when you need to explain what features you would use to build a model, don't say I don't know, don't say churn rate. Say something like users that didn't play orders within a certain period. Don't say conversion rate. Say something that you can quantify, something that you can implement in SQL or in Python or in whatever. So it's not just a common sense answer, and you can really think this extra step and put it in code and implement this. So this is a very common reason for rejections when data scientists just start throwing a lot of different ideas. We can do this and this and that, and do not go deep enough into any of them, because at the end you need to implement things, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so basically you can get from 3 to 6 rounds of different nature. Some of them will talk about, will ask about your past experience. You need to prepare some stories for that, like how you did something, how you identified requirements, how you help your colleagues, and things like this. Then there are sometimes what you, I think, called hypothetical questions. I usually call them case studies, but it's like they ask you, hey, we want to predict, like to identify users who leave our company, like stop using our services, for example, like churn or things like this. They sound vague, and this is on purpose. So you need to figure out how to get more requirements. And then, yeah, I guess these two you mentioned, there could be some other types of rounds, like I guess SQL, maybe machine learning related, maybe Python and things like this, right?
Of course, again, it really depends on the company and on the role. For some roles, you will be asked about machine learning in details, like how broad is your knowledge of different algorithms, and then if you say that you're familiar the most with one of them, how deep do you know this certain algorithm, the limitations, can you explain how it works, in what situations it works best, and so on. If you're applying for more like analytical or product data science roles, then it's very likely that there will be some SQL questions. Most likely, you will not be asked like simple things about these things and joins. Expect questions on window functions. I think it became a standard to see if data scientists.
It's terrible. I have to Google this every time. Why people expect you to know that?
No, I think it's okay. Like, this is my personal perspective. I think it's okay that if your code doesn't work, that at least you understand like what it is, how it works, and you can Google it, you know what to Google for. This is enough, right? Because you will be able to Google it at work. Mm-hmm. But at least you know that there is such a thing, that you know that there is a rank, or you know that there is a leg, but you don't have to remember the exact syntax.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and yeah, often happens then, for example, I forgot how to write, how to use window functions, but for this company, this is a super important thing, and they decide to reject me. So how can I handle this rejection? So how can I, yeah, what happens if I get rejected?
So first of all, don't take it personally, because it's not an exam, right? It doesn't say that you are bad. It doesn't say that you are not qualified. it probably says that there was someone else who is more relevant for this certain role and nothing else. And you never know who you're competing with. Maybe there was someone with 5 years more of experience than you have, or maybe someone who have more relevant experience for a certain company, for a certain industry. So it should never harm your self-esteem. Also, realistically, interviews are far from perfect, and the outcome is sometimes arbitrary. So maybe they made a mistake. So this also happens. So you never know. If you get rejected, ask for feedback. If you were not given a feedback, because this will hopefully help you identify what are the things that you can improve on. Also, depending on the company, maybe you can just reply to the same company in a different team right away. Usually it is load. And it again shows that maybe you are not a good fit for a certain role, but you're still a good fit for some different role in the same company. If you're thinking about replying for the same role, then maybe if it's a large enough company and it keeps hiring data scientists for a certain role, usually after some cool-off period, after a few months, you can reply to the same role. So I think you can think of it as a learning experience. Try to get as much from it, from learning perspective. Write notes, write down the questions that you were asked, and it will help you become more confident on the future interviews. The feedback will help you study and prepare for the future interviews.
And yeah, let's say I had a couple of rejections, but I learned from that. And then on the 5th interview, some other company, I finally got the offer. So what happens there? Like, what do I do now? Do I jump into accepting and call all my friends saying, hey, I got this job, or do I need to do something there?
You celebrate. So if you get an offer, well, first of all, learn what you're offered. The offers can be very different depending on the country and the company. It can be just the salary. It can be salary and some equity compensation. It can also mention some bonus. It can also have some sign-on bonus. Try to learn how does it compare to other companies. There is Glassdoor. There are other websites where you can try to estimate and find some baselines on how relevant this offer is for this role. And then I think it's always a good idea to negotiate because it doesn't harm. Like they will not change their mind if you try to negotiate a little bit. But your success with negotiations really depends on whether you have another offer.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have two competing offers, then it can happen that they will match the competing offer if it is still within some range, if it is still within the budget that that is allowed for a certain role. If you're negotiating and it sounds like it's not possible to negotiate on the base salary, ask if it is possible to get a sign-on bonus. But if you don't have competing offers, then most likely you don't have a lot of negotiation power. So maybe you will be able to get a few thousand extra, maybe not. That's why it's good to interview in a few companies at the same time to have this leverage.
Mm-hmm. Yes, having multiple offers is probably the best way you can negotiate. Other ways like that doesn't really work. So another offer is probably the best option. Yeah, so we have quite a few questions. Yeah, I think maybe we can cover them. So one of the questions I see in chat from Natalia is about age. So do you know if recruiters pay attention to the age of candidates? So if somebody is 40 years old, like, well, is it like a bad signal for the recruiter or not necessarily?
They're not supposed to know. Just don't put it on your CV. Don't put your picture. Don't put your age.
Okay, and that's what that's all you can do, or
But that's enough.
okay.
No, seriously. Like just don't say it. No, I mean it's illegal in most of the countries, at least in Europe.
So they are not supposed to reject you on this basis, right?
Well, first,
Okay, there's somebody younger. Okay, I'll go with that person.
no, of course. No, I think this is not a reason to not hire anyone. But if you have your date of birth or even a picture in the CV, I would just remove them, because this kind of personal information on your CV, it is noise, right? Because it has nothing to do with how valuable you will be for the company, for the team. Then just remove it.
The same goes with picture. I guess so. Your marital status, your home address. Okay. Yeah. So if this doesn't tell you how good you are at your job, don't put it in your CV, right?
Exactly.
Probably you still need to keep the name, because even though it doesn't.
You keep the name, but that's enough.
Yeah. So we have a question from Diksha. So I am a PhD scholar with zero industry experience, but I have knowledge required by industry expert. So how do I land a good data science job?
So think about it as a cold start problem. When you don't have initial data and you need to build some model, you need to create some synthetic data, right? So you can go to Kaggle.com. That's one way. You can go to some other places that offer you data. Ideally, you want to be creative and come up with some problem that can be solved with machine learning or whatever is your specialization. So I started by telling this story about how I got a job by building this fake and simple recommender engine. This is exactly that. Because for the hiring manager, what matters the most is whether or not you have some experience in the data science process. Like if you're building machine learning models, then it starts with identifying the problem, goes through building the model and evaluating the model, and then communicating the results and identifying the next steps. It's not as important whether it was your personal project or it was a commercial experience, because what's important is the skills. Ideally, this should be some commercial experience where when you work with a team of other data scientists that you had some supervision from your colleagues. If you don't have it, just create this experience. Identify a problem, just try to be creative. There is a lot of things to be solved with predictive models, with different kinds of models. Write a blog post about this and mention it on your CV. And the best thing you can do is try to build something for the company you are applying for, because this will certainly make you stand out.
Okay, so what you're saying is Kaggle is great, but if you check what the company is doing, and like you did, you thought, okay, what kind of problems they have, and you come up with a problem, and then you solve this problem, and you wrote a blog post and showed it to the hiring manager, and then they were amazed and hired you.
Exactly. I mean, it's not 100% that you will get hired, but if you spend time building some models specifically to have something on your CV, to be able to tell this story about your past experience, you will also learn by doing this, right? Don't think about this. It's such a waste of time. They will not hire me after. I will spend a weekend, or I will spend a week working on this project and writing this blog post, and then at the end it will not work out. Then it was a waste of time. No, you learned. You're a data scientist. This is what you chose to do. This is interesting. This is exciting. You learned some new things. So you will benefit in any way if you do it.
Yeah, thank you. So another question we have is that some rejection emails look quite human. The question is it worth answering such questions? Like when you get a rejection, so what should you actually answer to these questions? Do the recruiters even look at what you write them after the rejection?
Oh, just write thank you. Like what? I mean, there is no point in arguing. That's probably the worst thing you can do. just say that you appreciate the feedback. This is the best thing you can do, because again, maybe you will apply to the same company and it will be the same recruiter. Maybe you will apply to a different company and this recruiter will change jobs and will meet you there. This happens very often. So just try to not burn bridges, even if you think it was unfair to you. Try to learn from it, and yeah, I think you can only appreciate and send the thank you email to feedback, to interview feedback if you found it actionable and useful.
Yeah, thank you. So another question we have from Muhammad is related to negotiations. So how do I negotiate offers when my current salary is quite low? I think we kind of covered that, like by having two offers. But let's say I just have one offer and my current salary is low. What can I do to make sure that I try to get the best possible offer from this company?
Just try to put yourself in the shoes of the company and think about them. They offer you some number. You either accept it or not, and then they lose you and they will need to hire someone else. They are not supposed to know what your current salary is. Also, I think in a lot of companies it's just sorry, in a lot of countries it's just legal to request this. If they ask you, you don't have to answer. You can always just answer, I think my salary, what the offer I'm expecting from you is a good signal of how important data science is for the company and how you value me as an employee, which is true. But you don't have to tell the exact number that you're making right now. So try to make it more about like, here's my skills. You interviewed me, you made me an offer, you found me valuable for the company, but I find it low. So I'm hesitant about accepting it. What can we do about this?
Okay, so just try to negotiate basically, and say that well, when you have another offer, you can always say, if you don't do this, I'll go to the other company.
Exactly.
But in negotiations, you always have an option of not accepting an offer. So if you don't have another offer, you just have one, you always have an option of staying at your current place or not accepting. And
exactly.
This is the best alternative. You can just say, okay, for this number, it doesn't make sense for me to change a job, right?
You can always say, if it is true, you can say, I have a good performance review. There's a good chance that I will be promoted next year. So I'm not sure if it is worth for me to join with an offer like this. Maybe you could offer me a sign-on bonus that would offset this this bonus that I'm expecting in my current company. So try to explain that you're losing something, you have a better option than the offer that they offered you, and they have to offer something else for you to not choose this alternative option.
Yeah, thank you. So another question we have from somebody who just finished their PhD, and the job position they want to apply requires 3 or 5 years of experience in industry, which they don't have, obviously, because they just graduated from PhD. So do you think it still makes sense to apply for this position that requires some industry experience, or it's not worth spending the time?
Well, it sounds like it's some entry-level position. Like if it's 3 years of experience, I think it won't harm if you apply. Again, depends on your PhD. Like this definitely happens when people with no commercial experience get hired at this kind of roles. As long as you do believe that you could perform well in this role, right? If your experience when working in your PhD, you've gotten the relevant experience. So if you were working on something, I don't know, very theoretical and I don't know, have never implemented machine learning models, you think your programming skills are not good enough, and it is very clear that the role expects you to program a lot, then do not apply. But in general, it's very flexible. Job descriptions sometimes are just very standard. If you have one year of experience less, I think you should definitely give it a try and apply.
And I liked your point in the example you had about like it's a cold start problem, and you need some synthetic data to bootstrap your profile, sort of. So just try to get some experience, not necessarily from the industry, and if this matches the candidate profile they're looking for, maybe the hiring manager will just go for this, even though you don't have 3 years of experience, but because the project you did is so great, then they will at least talk to you, right? Okay, so another question we have is, I heard that these days named entity recognition and some other things are used for screening CVs. Like it's not a human that looks at the CV, but some sort of robot. So do you need to just to maximize your chances for applying a job? Do you just need maybe to copy the keywords you see on the description and paste them in your CV to maximize your chances? Or
well, so whatever you do, don't lie. Don't put the keywords that that you're not familiar with. What I was saying is you probably have more experience than some 5 keywords, or you cannot put a year of experience or more than a year of experience in one page of paper, right? So try to really make it as relevant as possible and remove everything that is not relevant. Sorry, I forgot what was the question.
yeah, I think like if you should just copy and paste things from
like automatic screening of CVs. So what happens often is you submit a CV in a PDF or whatever format, then it is automatically parsed and it is stored in some other database, applicant tracking system. So the parsing is used to just have a database with structured data. This is a very clear data problem, right? You have 1,000 CVs in very different format and PDFs and images. You want it to have in some structured format in a table where you have first name, you have ideally years of experience and current role. So this happens. The CVs are parsed by applicant tracking systems, but I have never heard of some automatic tool that rejects people based on their CVs. I think this is a myth that for some reason became very popular. Even if it happens, this is very rare. So 99% some like a human being will look at your CV.
Unless there is I don't know 300 or 400 applicants for a position, which happens these days. No, but yeah, probably what recruiters do is just whoever applied first, they just go through this as a backlog, so they still don't reject automatically based on some tracking system.
That's true. For some roles, there's a lot of applicants, and it's not that you get rejected automatically because your CV was not in the right format, but just because there was 100 other people. And
sometimes it's not humanly possible to look at all the applicants. That's unfortunate.
Exactly.
But yeah, still people look at this and they need to make a decision. So I think, so do you still have time for more questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because I also wanted to ask you a few things. So first, what did you actually learn after interviewing 300 data scientists?
Oh, so a lot of things. First of all, that I cannot walk into an interview with some certain expectations on the answers, because sometimes the answers I hear are correct and probably are even better and more efficient than what I expected. And this happens. And the insight is you should never have this this bias, like this is the correct answer that I'm expecting. If it's not true, then this is wrong, right? Maybe this not happens all the time, but this is a very humbling experience. Also, for most of the questions, like no matter how you phrase it, even if it's some very vaguely defined case study, usually there is some 4, 5, 6 different paths of answering the question. Some certain narratives in addressing the problem, some certain pitfalls when, for example, when choosing the model, for very common reasons. Like one of the common reasons is one of the common mistakes is there is a number of ideas. Like, for example, random forests are always better than linear regression, right? Like there is something like this in the air, but this is not true, right? In some cases, simple parametric models, even if they require you to spend more time doing processing, even if they have a lot more other reasons to not perform well compared to trees in some certain cases, there are cases when a parametric model is just better because because it can extrapolate and trees cannot. And these kind of answers I receive quite often when you introduce some context, when it is very clear, I don't know, when you need to extrapolate the data, when it is very clear that the data you will be predicting on will be beyond the range of the training data set. But still, there's this, I don't know how to call it, like it's not hype, it's just some common misconception that deep learning is better than trees and trees are better than parametric models. Try to understand the problem, try to really understand the limitations of algorithms. So this I've seen the most. Also, what did I learn after 300 interviews? I think one of the thoughts that I had is it would be very nice to be able to reverse the timeline and to know what feedback you would get after the interview before going to the interview.
How?
It sounds like a plot for some movie, but this is exactly what I'm trying to solve with NextRound, right? You try interviewing, you get your feedback on your, like, here are your strengths, here are your weaknesses, here are the materials to improve, and then on the next iteration you go to a real interview, having this feedback already, and having applied this this feedback and having read this materials to help you improve. Because this is how modeling works, right? You run iterations, you tune a few parameters and expect it to be better. So I think interviews itself is a very good learning experience. And this is not very obvious because I think it is usually perceived as an exam, right? As some assessment. Also, another thing is it is very important to ask questions on the interviews as a candidate, because this is a two-way street, right? You're deciding if you will like working in the company. The company decides whether you will be a valuable team member. For some reason, usually the time is distributed like for 45 minutes, it's an exam, and then 5 minutes at the end, if you're lucky, you will be able to ask a few questions. Well, if you get this 5 minutes, or if you get more, use as much of this time as possible, because it's in your interest to learn about the company. But by asking questions, you can also highlight your strengths. By asking questions about the company, about the workflow in the company, about the teammates, you can always highlight. You can always demonstrate that you care about the culture, that you care about the flexibility, that you are proactive. You can ask if you are working as a data scientist, and you ask what happens if a data scientist in the team suggests some product idea, like what is the process, like how bureaucratic it is, or how much time does it take from an idea to code in production. If you ask these kind of questions, it essentially, you essentially try to demonstrate your strengths by asking these kind of questions. So it's also a way of emphasizing some of your personality traits, like proactiveness or being good at stakeholder management, even in the last 5 minutes of the interview.
Okay, yeah, that's a great tip, to use questions to highlight your own strengths. That's great. So one last thing, because this is something we promised to people who registered for this event, is to talk like this teaser that he used, like how a horse's ass determined the design of a space shuttle, and what does it have to do with your CV?
Yeah, so this is a very famous story. So the legend says that the width, the distance between the rails on a railroad is the same as the width of a two-horse carriage, and this makes sense because people used to carry goods and themselves on carriages, and they didn't have engines; they had horses, and then they just reapplied the same size with the same tools when they started using railroads. But then several decades or a century later, a space shuttle was built. But they had to carry the parts of the space shuttle from the factory to the launch site. Mm-hmm. And they couldn't do it by car. They had to do it by train. And the details of the space shuttle had to fit the train. So this is how the width of two-horse carriage defined the design of a space shuttle through this limitation on the width. I don't know if it's true or not, but this is a very famous story. So every time I look at a CV, I think about this story because CVs in this current format, as a 1 or 2 pages of A4 paper, became popular in the late 20th century when everyone has got a printer, a Microsoft Office, and this was an easy way to hand them on an interview to the interviewer and just print your have this review of your experience on a piece of paper, because this was the way people shared information before. Like there was no internet at that time. Now it doesn't make any sense because no one prints the CV. I don't even remember when was the last time I saw a printed CV, but the format is still the same. And you can think about how other industries evolved in this time. Again, you can think about landing pages, how web page design has changed. But at the end, a CV is a landing page. The goal of a CV is to show your experience and to help recruiters, to help companies see how relevant your experience is for a certain team. And the format of a CV hasn't changed at all during this time. And we just spoke about putting your picture, your age, and I don't know, your home address on the CV. These things are completely relevant. So this is just an example of something very archaic that is still the case, that defines how people apply for jobs now, as much as these two horses influence the width of a space shuttle.
So what you're saying is we should ditch our CVs and then build landing pages to convince people to hire us?
No, what I'm saying is I would think of a CV, for example, like first as a landing page, something that can get your attention in the first few seconds and make you read further, because there is something you see that it is something valuable for you, for the company, for the recruiter. And then maybe at the bottom somewhere you can add some details that are not as relevant for the job. But you can think of it as a web page design. On the other side, you can think of a CV as a feature engineer, because hiring and applying for a job is classification, right? There is binary outcome. You either get an offer or don't get an offer, and the decision is based on this prediction on how well you will perform at the job. Your past experience is your raw unstructured data. Your CV is the features. So what do we do with feature engineering? We try to find feature importances. We try to remove outliers. We try to clean up the data. Think about the same. Like you have signal to noise ratio. Put as much signal relevant for the job for a certain role. Remove all the noise. If you think about models, again, my background is in personalization. Try to personalize the CV for every role you apply. Try to maximize this relevancy score between the job description and your CV, and not make it in the same way it was in the 80s.
Okay, makes sense. We still have quite a few questions, but I suggest to take these questions to Slack and answer them there. And I would like to thank you for joining us today and sharing your experience of what you learned from interviewing 500 data scientists with us. And thanks everyone else for joining us today. And I wish everyone a great weekend and see you next week.
Thank you for joining. Thank you for having me.
Goodbye.